The Chink and the Child by Thomas Burke. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Mike Harris. It is a tale of love and lovers that they tell in the low-lit causeway that slinks from West India Dock Road to the dark waste of waters beyond. In Pennyfields, too, you may hear it, and I do not doubt that it is told in the far-away Taiping and Singapore, in Tokyo and Shanghai, and those other gay-lamped haunts of wonder whither the wandering people of Limehouse go, and whence they return so casually. It's a tale for tears, and should you hear it in the lilied tongue of the yellow people, it would awaken in you all your pity. In our bald speech it must unhappily lose its essential fragrance, and that quality that will lift an affair of squalor into the loftier spheres of passion and imagination, beauty and sorrow. It will sound unconvincing, a little, the kind of thing that is best forgotten, perhaps. But listen. It is Battling Burrows, the lightning welterweight of Shadwell, the box of tricks, the tetrarch of the ring, who enters first. Battling Burrows, the pride of Ratcliffe, Poplar, and Limehouse, and the despair of his manager and backers. For he loved wine, woman, and song, and the boxing world held that he couldn't last long on that. There was any amount of money in him for his parasites if only the damned women could be cut out. But again and again would he disappear from his training quarters on the eve of a big fight, to consort with Molly and Dolly and to drink other things than barley water and lemon juice. Wherefore Chuck Lightfoot, his manager, forced him to fight on any and every occasion while he was good and a money-maker, for at any moment the collapse might come, and Chuck would be called upon by his creditors to strip off that shirt, in quotes, which at every contest he had laid upon his man. Battling was of a type that is too common in the eastern districts of London, a type that upsets all accepted classifications. He wouldn't be classed. He was a curious mixture of athleticism and degeneracy. He could run like a deer, leap like a greyhound, fight like a machine, and drink like a suction hose. He was a bully. He had the courage of the high hero. He was an open-air sport. He had the vices of a French decadent. It was one of his love adventures that properly began this tale, for the girl had come to Battling one night with a recital of terrible happenings, of an angered parent, of a slammed door. In her arms was a bundle of white rags. Now Battling, like so many sensualists, was also a sentimentalist. He took that bundle of white rags, he paid the girl money to get into the country, and the bundle of white rags had existed in and about his domicile in Pekin Street, Limehouse, for some 11 years. Her position was nondescript. To the casual observer it would seem that she was Battling's relief punching ball, an unpleasant post for any human creature to occupy, especially if you're a little girl of 12, and the place be the one-room household of the lightning welterweight. When Battling was cross with his manager, well, it is indefensible to strike your manager or to throw chairs at him if he's a good manager. But to use a dog whip on a small child is permissible, and quite as satisfying, at least. He found it so. On these occasions, then, when very cross with his sparring partners, or overflushed with victory and juice of the grape, he would flog Lucy. But he was reputed to be, by the boys, a good fellow. He only whipped the child when he was drunk, and he was only drunk for 8 months of the year. For just over 12 years this bruised little body had crept about Poplar and Limehouse. Always the white face was scarred with red or black furrowed with tears. Always in her steps and in her look was expectation of dread things. Night after night her sleep was broken by the cheerful Battling's brute voice and violent hands, and terrible were the lessons which life taught her in those few years. Yet for all the starved face and the transfixed air, there was a lurking beauty about her, a something that called you in the soft curve of her cheek, that cried for kisses and was fed with blows, and in the splendid mournfulness that grew in eyes and lips. The brown hair chimed against the pale face like the rounding of a verse. The blue cotton frock and the broken shoes could not break the loveliness of her slender figure, or the shy grace of her movements as she flitted about the squalid alleys of the docks. Though in all that region of wasted life and toil and decay, there was not one that noticed her. Until... Now there lived in Chinatown, in one lousy room over Mr. Tai Fu's store in Pennyfields, a wandering yellow man named Cheng Huan. Cheng Huan was a poet. He did not realize it. He had never been able to understand why he was unpopular, and he died without knowing. But a poet he was, tinged with the materialism of his race, and in his poor listening heart strange echoes would awake of which he himself was barely conscious. He regarded things differently from other sailors. He felt things more passionately, and things which they felt not at all. So he lived alone instead of at one of the lodging houses. Every evening he would sit at his window and watch the street. Then, a little later, he'd take a jolt of opium at the place at the corner of Formosa Street. He had come to London by devious ways. He had loafed on the Bund at Shanghai. The fateful intervention of a crimp had landed him on a boat. He got to Cardiff and sojourned in its Chinatown. Thence to Liverpool, to Glasgow. Thence by a ticket from the Asiatics Aid Society to Limehouse, where he remained for two reasons: because it cost him nothing to live there, and because he was too lazy to find a boat to take him back to Shanghai. So he would lounge and smoke cheap cigarettes and sit at his window, from which point he had many times observed the lyrical Lucy. He noticed her casually. Another day he observed her not casually. Later he looked long at her. Later still he began to watch for her and for that strangely provocative something about the toss of her head and the hang of the little blue skirt as it coyly kissed her knee. Then that beauty which all Limehouse had missed smote Chang. Straight to his heart it went and cried itself into his very blood. Thereafter the spirit of poetry broke her blossoms all about his odorous chamber. Nothing was the same. Pennyfields became a happy lanterned street, and the monotonous fiddle in the house opposite was the music of his father's. Bits of old song floated through his mind, little sweet verses of Le Tai Pu, murmuring of plum blossom, rice field, and stream. Day by day he would moon at his window or shuffle about the streets, lighting to a flame when Lucy would pass and gravely return his quiet regard. And night after night, too, he would dream of a pale, lily-lovely child. And now the fates moved swiftly various pieces on their sinister board, and all that followed happened with a speed and precision that showed direction from higher ways. It was Wednesday night in Limehouse, and for once clear of mist. Out of the coloured darkness of the causeway stole the muffled wail of reed instruments, and though every window was closely shuttered, between the joints shot jets of light and stealthy voices, and you could hear the whisper of slippered feet, and the stuttering steps, and the saddest. It was to the café in the middle of the causeway, lit by the pallid blue light that is the symbol of China throughout the world, that Cheng Huan came, to take a dish of noodles and some tea. Thence he moved to another house whose stairs ran straight to the street, and above whose doorway a lamp glowed like an evil eye. At this establishment he mostly took his pipe of chandu and a brief chat with the keeper of the house, for, although not popular and very silent, he liked sometimes to be in the presence of his compatriots. Like a figure of a shadowgraph he slid through the doors and up the stairs. The chamber he entered was a bit of the Orient squatting at the portals of the West. It was a well-kept place wherein one might play a game of fan-tan, or take a shot or so of Li-Hyun, or purchase other varieties of Oriental delight. It was sunk in a purple dusk, though here and there a lantern strung the glooms. Low couches lay around the walls, and strange men decorated them. Chinese, Japs, Malays, Lascars, with one or two white girls, and sleek, noiseless attendants swam from couch to couch. Away in the far corner sprawled a lank figure in brown shirting, its nerveless fingers curled about the stem of a spent pipe. On one of the lounges a scorbutic nigger sat with a Jewess from Shadwell. Squatting on a table in the centre beneath one of the lanterns was a musician with a reed, blinking upon the company like a sly cat, and making his melody of 6 repeated notes. The atmosphere churned. The dirt of years, tobacco of many growings, opium, betel-nut, and moist flesh allied themselves in one grand assault against the nostrils. As Cheng brooded on his insect-ridden cushion, of a sudden the lantern above the musician was caught by the ribbon of his reed. It danced and flung a hazy radiance on a divan in the shadow. He saw, started, half rose. His heart galloped, and the blood pounded in his quiet veins. Then he dropped again, crouched, and stared. O lily flowers and plum blossoms! O silver streams and dim-starred skies! O wine and roses, song and laughter! For there, kneeling on a mass of rugs, mazed and big-eyed but understanding, was Lucy, his little maid. Through the dusk she must have felt his intent gaze upon her, for he crouched there, fascinated, staring into the now obscured corner where she knelt. But the sickness which momentarily gripped him on finding in this place the snowy-breasted Pearl passed, and gave place to great joy. She was here. He would talk with her. Little English he had, but simple words, those with few gutturals, he had managed to pick up. So he rose, the masterful lover, and with feline movements crossed the nightmare chamber to claim his own. If he wondered how Lucy came to be in this bagnio, the explanation is simple. Battling was in training. He had flogged her that day before starting work. He had then had a few brandies, not many, some 18 or 19, and had locked the door of his room and taken the key. Lucy was therefore homeless, and a girl somewhat older than Lucy, so old and so wise as girls are in that region, saw in her a possible source of revenue. So there they were, and to them appeared Chang. From what horrors he saved her that night cannot be told, for her ways were too audaciously childish to hold her long from harm in such a place. What he brought to her was love and death, for he sat by her. He looked at her, reverently yet passionately. He touched her, wistfully yet eagerly. He locked a finger in her wondrous hair. She did not start away. She did tremble. She knew well what she had to be afraid of in that place. But she was not afraid of Chang. She pierced the mephitic gloom and scanned his face. No, she was not afraid. His yellow hands, his yellow face, his smooth black hair. Well, he was the first thing that had ever spoken soft words to her, the first thing that had ever laid a hand upon her that was not brutal, the first thing that had deferred in manner towards her as though she, too, had a right to live. She knew his words were sweet, though she did not understand them. Nor can they be set down. Half that he spoke was in village Chinese, the rest in a mangling of English which no distorted spelling could possibly reproduce. But he drew her back against the cushions and asked her name, and inquired of her age. She told him, and she told him her age. And he had had then two beautiful words which came easily to his tongue. He repeated them again and again. Lucia, little Lucia, 12, 12. Musical phrases they were, dropping from his lips, and to the child who heard her name pronounced so lovingly, they were the lost heights of melody. She clung to him and he to her. She held his strong arm in both of hers as they crouched on the divan and nestled her cheek against his coat. Well, he took her home to his wretched room. Little Lucia, come home, Lucia. His heart was on fire. As they slipped out of the noisomeness into the night air and crossed the West India Dock Road into Pennyfields, they passed unnoticed. It was late, for one thing, and for another, well, nobody cared particularly. His blood rang with soft music and the solemnity of drums, for surely he had found now what for many years he had sought, his world's one flower. Wanderer he was, from Tuan Tsen to Shanghai, Shanghai to Glasgow, Cardiff, Liverpool, London. He had dreamed often of the women of his native land. Perchance one of them should be his flower. Women indeed there had been. Swatow, he had recollections of certain rose-winged hours in coast cities. At many places to which chance had led him, a little bird had perched itself upon his heart, but so lightly and for so brief a while as hardly to be felt. But now he had found her in this alabaster Cockney child, so that he was glad and had great joy of himself and the blue and silver night and the harsh flares of the poplar hippodrome. You will observe that he had claimed her, but had not asked himself whether she were of an age for love. The white perfection of the child had captivated every sense. It may be that he forgot that he was in London and not in Tuan Tsen. It may be that he did not care. Of that nothing can be told. All that is known is that his love was a pure and holy thing. Of that we may be sure, for his worst enemies have said it. Slowly, softly, they mounted the stairs to his room, and with almost an obeisance he entered and drew her in. A bank of cloud raced to the east, and a full moon thrust a sharp sword of light upon them. Silence lay over all Pennyfields. With a bird-like movement she looked up at him, her face alight, her tiny hands upon his coat, clinging, wondering, trusting. He took her hand and kissed it, repeated the kiss upon her cheek and lip and little bosom, twirling his fingers in her hair, docilely, and echoing the smile of his lemon lips in a way that thrilled him almost to laughter. She returned his kisses impetuously, gladly. He clasped the nestling to him, bruised, tearful, with the love of life almost thrashed out of her. She had fluttered to him out of the evil night. "Oh, little Lucia!" And he put soft hands upon her and smoothed her and crooned over her many gracious things in his flowered speech. So they stood in the moonlight while she told him the story of her father, of her beatings and starvings and unhappiness. "Oh, little Lucia! White blossom! 12 years old." As he spoke, the clock above the Millwall docks shot 12 crashing notes across the night. When the last echo died he moved to a cupboard, and from it he drew a strange thing. Formless masses of blue and gold, magical things of silk, and a vessel that was surely Aladdin's lamp, and a box of spices. He took these robes, and with tender, reverent fingers removed from his white blossom the besmirched rags that covered her, and robed her again, and led her then to the heap of stuff that was his bed, and bestowed her safely. For himself, he squatted on the floor before her, holding one grubby little hand. There he crouched all night under the lyric moon, sleepless, watchful, and sweet content was his. He had fallen into an uncomfortable posture, and his muscles ached intolerably, but she slept, and he dared not move nor release her hand lest he should awaken her. Weary and trustful she slept, knowing that the Yellow Man was kind, and that she might sleep with no fear of a steel hand smashing the delicate structure of her dreams. In the morning, when she woke, still wearing her blue and yellow silk, she gave a cry of amazement. Chink had been about. Many times had he glided up and down the 2 flights of stairs, and now at last his room was prepared for his princess. It was swept and garnished, and was an apartment worthy of a maid who is loved by a poet-prince. There was a bead curtain, there were muslins of pink and white, there were 4 bowls of flowers, clean, clear flowers, to gladden the white blossom and set off her sharp beauty, and there was a bowl of water, and a sweet lotion for the bruise on her cheek. When she had risen, her prince ministered to her with rice and egg and tea. Cleansed and robed and calm, she sat before him, perched on the edge of many cushions as on a throne, with all the grace of the child princess in the story. She was a poem. The beauty hidden by neglect and fatigue shone out now more clearly and vividly, and from the head, sunning over with curls, to the small white feet, now bathed and sandaled, she seemed the living interpretation of a Chinese lyric. And she was his. Her sweet self and her prattle and her bird-like ways were all his own. Oh, beautifully they loved. For 2 days he held her. Soft caresses from his yellow hands and long devout kisses were all their demonstration. Each night he would tend her as might mother to child, and each night he watched and sometimes slumbered at the foot of her couch. But now there were those that ran to battling at his training quarters across the river, with the news that his child had gone with a Chink, a Yellow Man, and battling was angry. He discovered parental rights. He discovered indignation. A Yellow Man after his kid. He'd learn him. Battling did not like men who were not born in the same great country as himself. Particularly he disliked yellow men. His birth and education in Shadwell had taught him that of all creeping things that creep upon the earth, the most insidious is the Oriental in the West. And a Yellow Man and a child, it was, as you might say, so kind of, well, wasn't it? He bellowed that it was unnatural. The Yeller Man would go through it. Yeller, it was his supreme condemnation, his final epithet for all conduct of which he disapproved. There was no doubt that he was extremely annoyed. He went to the Blue Lantern in what was once Ratcliffe Highway and thumped the bar, and made all his world agree with him. And when they agreed with him he got angrier still, so that when a few hours later he climbed through the ropes of the Netherlands to meet Bud Tuffet for 10 rounds, it was Bud's fight all the time, and to that bright boy's astonishment he was the victor on points at the end of the 10. Battling slouched out of the ring, still more determined to let the Chink have it where the chicken had the axe. He left the house with 2 pals and a black man, and a number of really inspired curses from his manager. On the evening of the 3rd day, then, Shaggs slipped sleepily down the stairs to procure more flowers and more rice. The genial Ho Ling, who keeps the Canton store, held him in talk some little time, and he was gone from his room perhaps half an hour. Then he glided back and climbed with happy feet the 40 steps to his Temple of Wonder. With a push of a finger he opened the door, and the blood froze on his cheeks. The flowers fell from him. The temple was empty and desolate. White Blossom was gone. The muslin hangings were torn down and trampled underfoot. The flowers had been flung from their bowls about the floor, and the bowls lay in 50 fragments. The joss was smashed. The cupboard had been opened. Rice was scattered here and there. The little straight bed had been jumped upon by brute feet. Everything that could be smashed or violated had been so treated, and, horror of all, the blue and yellow silk robe had been rent in pieces, tied in grotesque knots, and slung derisively about the table legs. I pray devoutly that you may never suffer what Chang Huan suffered in that moment. The pangs of death with no dying, the sickness of the soul which longs to escape and cannot, the imprisoned animal within the breast which struggles madly for a voice and finds none, all the agonies of all the ages, the agonies of every abandoned lover and lost woman past and to come, all these things were his in that moment. Then he found voice and gave a great cry, and men from below came up to him, and they told him how the man who boxed had been there with a black man, and how he had torn the robes from his child and dragged her down the stairs by her hair, and how he had shouted aloud for Chang and had vowed to return and deal separately with him. Now a terrible dignity came to Chang, and the soul of his great fathers swept over him. He closed the door against them and fell prostrate over what had been the resting place of White Blossom. Those without heard strange sounds of an animal in its last pains, and it was even so. Chang was dying. The sacrament of his high and holy passion had been profaned. The last sanctuary of the Oriental, his sole dignity, had been assaulted. The love robes had been torn to ribbons, the veil of his temple cut down. Life was no longer possible, and life without his little lady, his White Blossom, was no longer desirable. Prostrate he lay for the space of some 5 minutes. Then, in his face all the pride of accepted destiny, he arose. He drew together the little bed. With reverent hands he took the pieces of blue and yellow silk, kissing them and fondling them and placing them about the pillow. Silently he gathered up the flowers and the broken earthenware and burnt some prayer papers and prepared himself for death. Now it is the custom among those of the sect of Chang that the dying shall present love gifts to their enemies, and when he had set all in order he gathered his brown canvas coat about him, stole from the house, and set out to find Battling Burrows, bearing under the coat his love gift to Battling. White Blossom he had no hope of finding. He had heard of Burrows many times, and he judged that, now that she was taken from him, never again would he hold those hands or touch that laughing hair. Nor, if he did, could it change things from what they were. Nothing that was not a dog could live in the face of this sacrilege. As he came before the house in Pekin Street where Battling lived, he murmured gracious prayers. Fortunately it was a night of thick river mist, and through the enveloping velvet none could observe or challenge him. The main door was open, as are all doors in this district. He writhed across the step and through to the back room, where again the door yielded to a touch. Darkness. Darkness and silence and a sense of frightful things. He peered through it. Then he fumbled under his jacket, found a match, struck it. An inch of candle stood on the mantel-shelf. He lit it. He looked round. No sign of Burrows, but almost before he looked, he knew what awaited him. But the sense of finality had kindly stunned him. He could suffer nothing more. On the table lay a dog whip. In the corner a belt had been flung. Half across the greasy couch lay White Blossom. A few rags of clothing were about her pale, slim body. Her hair hung limp as her limbs. Her eyes were closed. As Cheng drew near her and saw the savage red rails that ran across and across the beloved body, he could not scream. He could not think. He dropped beside the couch. He laid gentle hands upon her and called soft names. She was warm to the touch. The pulse was still. Softly, oh so softly, he bent over the little frame that had enclosed his friend's spirit, and his light kisses fell all about her. Then, with the undirected movements of a sleepwalker, he bestowed the rags decently about her, clasped her in strong arms, and crept silently into the night. From Pekin Street to Pennyfields it's but a turn or two, and again he passed unobserved as he bore his tired bird back to her nest. He laid her upon the bed and covered the lily limbs with the blue and yellow silks, and strewed upon her a few of the trampled flowers. Then, with more kisses and prayers, he crouched beside her. So, in the ghastly Limehouse morning, they were found, the dead child and the Chink, kneeling beside her, with a sharp knife gripped in a vice-like hand, its blade far between his ribs. Meantime, having vented his wrath on his prodigal daughter, Battling, still cross, had returned to the Blue Lantern, and there he stayed with a brandy tumbler in his fist, forgetful of an appointment at Premier Land, whereby he should have been in the ring at 10 o'clock sharp. For the space of an hour Chuck Lightfoot was going blasphemously to and fro in Poplar, seeking Battling and not finding him, and murmuring in tearful tones, "Battling, you damn man blasted Battling, where are ye?" His opponent was in his corner sure enough, but there was no fight, for Battling lurched from the Blue Lantern to Pekin Street. He lurched into his happy home, and he cursed Lucy and called for her, and finding no matches, he lurched to where he knew the couch should be and flopped heavily down. Now, it is a peculiarity of the reptile tribe that its members are impatient of being flopped on without warning. So when Battling flopped, 18 inches of writhing gristle upreared itself on the couch and got home on him, as Bud Tuffet had done the night before, one to the ear, one to the throat, and another to the forearm. Battling went down and out, and he too was found in the morning, with Cheng Huan's love gift coiled about his neck. End of The Chink and the Child, by Thomas Burke, read by Mike Harris.